Welcome to the first edition of the Noble Fury podcast. Today we're going to talk about the recent assassination attempt of Donald Trump in comparison and contrast to the assassination attempt of Ronald Reagan.
A lot of folks are just learning the past few days is that there was an Iranian attempt to assassinate Donald Trump.
I saw this.
So the plan was never fully materialized because they couldn't get the kind of contact with him that they wanted to get. So they didn't execute, they didn't follow through with it. But the Iranian government, through the Iranian Guard, were going to retaliate for the assassination of Soleimani. Yeah.
And wasn't it tied to a journalist, too? It was a New York Times journalist they were going to try to assassinate in conjunction with the Trump assassination. Did you see that?
I didn't. No, I didn't follow that.
They had the headline I saw had a picture of the journalist, and it said, Iranian government tied to assassination attempt of New York Times journalist. I don't know if it was New York Times, New York journalist and Donald Trump.
Are you sure it wasn't that the New York Times journalist was the assassin?
That is a different podcast. Okay. That is in fact quite possible. I wouldn't put it past them.
Okay. All right.
So one of the things, the attributes of both assassination attempts that I'm most interested in is the way the marketing. The old joke in Hollywood of don't ever let a disaster go to waste. I don't have the right word there in that expression, but and neither of these presidents, in fact, they did not waste the opportunity with which to crystallize and leverage these assassination attempts and turn them into fascinatingly good things. Bizarre how Reagan made jokes and was joking with the press and with his staff and with the hospital staff and the surgeons, going just till he went under, about having a bullet an inch from his heart. I read that Reagan lost half the blood in his body. That seems like that would kill you.
Well, I think they had to transfuse him. He was on a transfusion system in the hospital almost from the get-go because of the blood loss. But I do not think he lost all that blood externally.
Yeah, the one thing it seems pretty extreme. The one thing I also thought was interesting is in the spirit of the Gipper, Reagan insisted on walking from the ambulance or from the limousine into the hospital, and he collapsed in the hallway.
He did, yeah.
And so you see though that he to the bitter end was, I'm an everyman. He also didn't want to see the president in a wheelchair.
Well, he famously, before the anesthetic kicked in, he famously commented to his surgeons, I hope you are all Republicans.
Which is brilliant. Absolutely. Of course, that is the lead story on the news. President's been shot. He seems to be okay. He's recovering. And he made this joke before he went under, right? And the whole country has to sort of smirk.
There's an interesting corollary between Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump in that same way. Donald Trump is known for his humor. He's known for his pranks and his jokes. Now, he's probably considered to be a lot more crass than Ronald Reagan.
Sure.
But they both had a sense of humor, and they both used their sense of humor widely whenever they could.
Well, even, and also the way they both reacted publicly, to think for a moment that Trump was within less than an inch. Reagan's apparently the bullet was about an inch from his heart. Obviously, if the bullet was an inch closer to Trump's head, he would be dead, considerably dead, as they like to say medically. And he gets up and does this fight thing.
Yeah.
I mean, just your adrenaline's right. If you think for a minute, most people, I'm sorry to say, perhaps me included, would be cowarding down in the protective custody, physical custody of the Secret Service, right? And he's fighting them off and doing this fight. I mean, this moment, the levity and the wherewithal to, I hate to say it politically, to capitalize on that moment, right?
The insight.
Yes,
so
thank
you. If you do a slow motion replay of the video, you actually see the moment that he realizes, I'm going to stand up and say something.
Well, he realized somebody tried to shoot me and I didn't get shot.
I think he realized that he was not in harm's way anymore. And I think he realized, hey, there is still more for me to do here. And I can use this to my advantage.
Unbelievable.
Do a slow-mo replay of the clip, and you'll see that moment.
Where he sort of has that realization.
He stops, they're kind of jumping over him, and then he tells him, hey, wait a second. And then he stands up and says, fight.
And the blood's running down his face. I mean, it's stuff of Hollywood movies.
Yeah, sure.
And it was happening in real time.
Do you know what's interesting? That very scene, when the Secret Service agents come and sort of surround him, it kind of reminds me of the very famous black and white footage of Ronald Reagan after he was shot. The moment that Hinkley discharges a .22 caliber revolver, by the way, this is a revolver, very old school kind of gun, .22 caliber, very small caliber.
We're getting into that Devastator thing.
He's using.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry.
He's using a sort of hybrid round that was being sold back then called a Devastator, and the Devastator round had an explosive charge in it.
In the cap, yeah.
2 of the rounds seemed to have exploded, while the other 4 did not. There were a total of 6 rounds fired in a matter of 1.4 seconds. The one that exploded,
I think it was 1.7, but yeah, something like that.
The one that exploded is thought to have hit James Brady, who was Reagan's press secretary at the time, in the head. Hence the catastrophic damage he had. This was a man who really lost his use of his body, his mind, his mouth for years and years and years.
He lost a chunk of his brain matter, in essence.
Yes. Right. Yes, and he was a press secretary, and so his job was speaking quick and accurately, and working on his toes. He could not do that after that, so he lost his career. Essentially,
he had trouble walking and talking, in essence, and he lost a lot of motor function, just the basic.
So, in contrast,
which is heartbreaking.
The shooter with the Trump assassination attempt, this guy Crooks, it was his last name. And he used an AK, or rather an AR-15, which is a 5.56 millimeter .223. No, it's a rifle round. It's a very small. It's also a .22 caliber, but it's a rifle round. So the projectile has a lot more gunpowder in it, and it goes at a higher velocity, 2 or 3 times as fast as a .22.
Just based on the amount of gunpowder in the.
Essentially, the amount of gunpowder and the shape of the bullet. So it can travel farther and much more powerful, higher velocity. Did
you hear? I heard a bunch of different distances, as much as 500 yards. If you think about being 500 yards, how close he came.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. It's uncanny that a kid, who's 20, call him a kid, who didn't have military training, wasn't a marksman, didn't spend 2 years every day at a range. Apparently went to the range a few times, but in essence, this kid was off by less than an inch from 500 yards.
Yeah.
You and I, most people would land again too under the duress and unbelievable. Your hands are shaking, right? Your adrenaline's flowing. You're trying to shoot the president. You can't imagine, how you would hold and steady yourself when you're trying to change the course of history, and then come within an inch from 500 yards. I would assume at that distance the wind is a factor, right? He's sitting on a hot roof. I mean, it almost boggles the mind to think how close he came with his training or lack of.
The similarities are all over the place.
You mean between Hinkley and Cook?
Hinkley was a young man, he'd gone in and out of college. He was taking some business courses for a semester, drop out, go back in for a semester. I think he was 24 years old when he shot Reagan. But he also had some training with his .22 pistol. In fact, he was arrested here in Nashville the year before with handguns while traveling on an airplane. So he was doing some.
You mean back in the good old days when you could just bring a gun on the plane? Just like how many? It's like she's only got 10 bullets. Let him on.
Apparently, he was undeclared, and he was supposed to have declared it, but he was arrested at the airport. In 1978, so the Reagan assassination happens in 1981. In 1978, Hinkley joined the American Nazi platform. And so he was trying to sort of, radicalize, I guess, is the way to say that today. And he had attended many events in St. Louis, elsewhere throughout the United States. And he had been apparently stalking Jimmy Carter. So maybe his first real target was Jimmy Carter, and he ended up using Reagan later. But that's just speculation. We don't know that for sure.
It really speaks to the fact that these assassins really have to have this public disclosure of when presidents are going to be available. Right. It's all about opportunity, right? And if you close the window on the opportunity, to think how close Hinkley, when you see that footage, Hinkley's so close to the camera, he's out of frame.
Yeah.
And Reagan walks into frame. Hinkley's 10 feet, 12, 15 feet?
Yeah, I think at the farthest point, he was 30 feet from the door of Reagan's limousine.
But how far is he from Reagan?
Well, Reagan was behind the door on the other side. So
he was 30 feet. He wasn't
about 30. I think it was about 30 feet.
Looks closer on camera, but
so that's an interesting observation you bring up, because what we have is a failure of the Secret Service to properly manage crowds back then. So apparently within the Secret Service world,
there was a complacency, though, don't you? I mean, there was
back then they had a protocol where you had a couple different rings, and you did not let people past this sort of outer ring. And Hinkley was within the outer ring. He was there waiting, and no one had cleared him. We see lots of issues arising in the Trump setup with the Secret Service as well.
Wait, but there's a big point to be made here that I think is really important, and that it's subtle, but it's significant. Reagan was not the polarizing figure politically at that time. I don't know.
Au contraire.
No, not to the level that Trump is, please. No, not even close. Reagan had his detractors, and of course the media, no, sure, left wing, right wing, all that, got it. Locked in 81 without social media, without all the backing of big education and big media, legacy media. All that is now what drove a lot of this assassination attempt. So whether or not Trump is that divisive, he is painted to be that divisive.
He was described as, by the mainstream media at the time, there were colorful descriptions of him being more aligned with Nazis.
You're talking about Trump?
No, I'm talking about Reagan. Yes.
But so are you saying, though, that it's that the divisiveness politically was on par in 81 as it was in 24?
I don't know.
I do.
I can't say that. I can't say that. I was a little guy then.
Yeah, you're older than me. I wasn't born yet. But the fact of the matter is, what I would say seriously is, I mean, I appreciate your point, and I didn't mean to. What I'm saying is, I don't think there was the same opportunity to develop that level of divisiveness because of the lack of social media, because there was only 3 networks, because there wasn't a 24-hour news cycle. In 1981, the TV station still signed off, I believe. They still went dark.
Let me throw something out there for you to digest. The only person either running for president, that is, having been president, running for president, or having been in office as president, the only people that have ever been harmed or killed, with the exception of one, have been Republicans.
Coincidence?
So Abraham Lincoln, right? Garfield.
McKinley.
Yeah. JFK. JFK was a Democrat.
Interesting.
But
there's a tie into all the Kennedys, so that's almost an outlier. I'm not trying to be cheeky. I'm not trying to be cheeky.
The government, the insiders, the deep state despised Kennedy because he wanted to undo some things. So
there's a whole conversation about if Kennedy was alive today, he would have been a Republican. I mean, he was fiscally conservative.
That's true. In many ways, he would be. RFK Jr. may be an example of where he might fall politically today. But on the side of not killed, Teddy Roosevelt was running for office. He had left office. He had taken 4 years out. The Bull Moose Party. He became a Republican again, and he's running for office. And he was shot, 38 caliber, while on a stage. So he survived. And then Ronald Reagan shot him in the ear.
I don't know this, and maybe you don't either. What year? I wonder what year the Secret Service was formed.
Yeah.
Was the Secret Service around in FDR's day?
So the Secret Service, in its modern conception, comes later. But just after the Lincoln administration, a type of Secret Service was formed to protect presidents.
Wow.
After that.
sensing. Obviously, it sounds crazy, but in some respects, just based on the slavery issue, Lincoln could have been as polarizing and divisive as Trump in modern day. I mean, there's almost, it'd be interesting to do a podcast. It sounds funny, but because technology is so different, you could do one, the similarities between Lincoln and Trump, like
possibly
the setup, right? And what precipitated it. And again.
But you have to ask the question, going back, right? I don't want to get too far off this because this is an important sort of subject to sort of stew on is why is it that Republican presidents are targets and who are targeting them?
Yeah. Well, it's a complicated issue. It's nuanced and it's layered and it has to do with the messaging of the media. It has to do with social media. It has to do with the platforms that are allotted to the left-wing media. Shows like The View that are routinely saying that Trump is a Hitler and a fascist, and those kinds of things to people. Look, you have to have mental illness to try to kill a president. Mm-hmm. You just mentally, you're not stable. And so when you feed that dialogue, when you feed that on that platform in a daily, you turn on MS, as they joke, MSLSD, and you hear people talking about characterizing Trump in that is Madison Square Garden was in similarity to the 1939. It's so bizarre, but if you're not stable and you're running that through the processor, microprocessor of a mentally ill person, you understand that's where that's coming from. A lot of that happens based on the dialogue, the daily dialogue of the left, which is demonizing and picking on Donald Trump for things that literally are just demonstrably false.
So the the point about the period in the late 70s and early 80s being fundamentally different from today's sort of political climate, I agree with. But the media was attacking politicians, particularly Republican politicians,
since the beginning of time.
Well, particularly with the references to Nazism and fascism since after World War II. In fact, most politicians who've run for president on the Republican side have been called by mainstream press a fascist and/or a Nazi. Famously, a Los Angeles cartoonist drew a depiction of Reagan in Nazi gear and Nazi garb at a beer hall in Germany, espousing his libertarian.
Sounds very Trumpian.
Exactly. So we've seen episodes of this. There was a Missouri representative who said that Trump's policies were right out of Mein Kampf. Well, these are the references that have just change from period to period. The only thing that is different is they put a different politician's name for the reference.
Well, it feels like, though, that the first politician, and I might get some pushback on this, the first politician to really galvanize public opinion was Ronald Reagan by making it not just a talking point. It was his platform. It was Reagan's fundamental platform was less government, anti-socialism, and really there's a famous soundbite of Reagan, get off my back, get out of my pocket, and let me run things myself. And so that was particularly unpopular at the time. And Reagan, whether this is worth much or not, did it kind of smiling, very charming, very disarming, right? There was no...
The Gipper.
Yeah, right. Well, but there was a comfortableness when you were listening to Ronald Reagan, he put you at comfort, whether you're on the left or the right. And this is off-putting to the left because they didn't like the fact that he was like somebody reading a bedtime story and he was pushing public policy and he was doing it really effectively. So I think we're both sort of saying the same thing. My point was kind of that Reagan was really, it was kind of the first time in modern politics where they really crossed, where the left really crossed the right. And your point is
it's been ongoing. That's my point.
We're both right, really.
Nixon was dressed in a very similar Nazi outfit, and Ford after him was disparaged as being a fascist. So,
and an interesting point too, by the way, quickly think about.
But Jimmy Carter was not. Think
about Nixon's delivery the sort of this bags under his eyes and hunched over and bald and sweating, and Reagan with this coiffed hair and this very charming, and he was always making jokes, and he very confident, and very grounded, and that was off-putting to the left because it was reassuring, and it worked. U.S.
It's interesting you say that. He was a very positive person. His daughter, I can't even think of her name. Davis.
Patty. No.
Patty.
Was it?
Patty.
No, that's Nixon. Who's Patty?
Whatever.
Okay.
So
I can't think of her name.
Reagan's daughter, famously, sort of, criticized her father, whatever chance she could get. But she always talked about the pain. Reagan grew up in a home with an alcoholic father, and while he wasn't necessarily physically abusive, the family suffered from having alcoholism in the home.
Sure.
So she always wanted to dwell on the fact that his charm and his positive attitude was a counterbalance or some coping mechanism, as she would describe it, to the pain that he had.
Probably was.
Maybe he was just a very resilient, positive person. There's some people, many people, most people in the world have trauma in their lives, but some are able to spring back very nimbly because they're positive. People who want to dwell in the negative, they tend not to be as nimble and be as able to sort of get themselves bootstraps pulled up and moving forward.
The glass half empty, half full thing.
And I think that she's one of those people. If you just listen to her interviews, you'll see that she's got this sort of despondent, downtrodden, almost a menacing quality about her.
There's a lot. This really plays into a lot of the dialogue from the left, which is this victimization, this entitlement, this identity politics. Not taking care of yourself. This all feeds into socialism. A stipend, free housing, free healthcare. I mean, right? It's all part of that sort of I'm a victim. Woe is me. And why doesn't somebody help me? What's wrong? It's the government's job to help me. And obviously, Reagan back then was really, really pushing a populist message, which was, no, it's not the government's job. He was really about, he's out riding horses, for gosh sakes, in the Sherpa coat with the wool collar.
Right? Teddy Roosevelt many years before him.
Yeah. I also think it's kind of interesting, too, that there's it's not directly to the point I just was making, but it's funny because when you think about Reagan's assassination attempt, it is vastly different in one minor detail, which is that Trump was not the president. He was a former president and the nominee.
Yeah.
Right. So it's almost like.
Well, that's Teddy Roosevelt, right?
Yeah.
So
right. That's right. So, two had that in common.
That's right.
He was the candidate.
He was not reelected.
It's just funny because when you think of the assassination attempt on Trump, it feels like he was president. Like they shot at Reagan, president. They shot at Trump, president.
So one of the interesting fact bits about Teddy Roosevelt was when he was alive, there was no term limit on presidents.
Yeah.
So since Washington, presidents had not exceeded 2 terms in office until Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which was the cousin of Teddy Roosevelt, later after Teddy Roosevelt. And he was elected 4 times, died early in his 4th term, and then Congress said, "Wait a second, we do not want to have a monarch or a tyrant, so we're putting a term limit on."
I think if Trump could have been president for 4 terms, half the country would move out to Canada. It would be fantastic. Yeah. The freeways would open up. There'd be no lines at the stores. Really great, right? Yeah. COVID, there would just be naturally 6 feet because there's just not that many people. So if we could, maybe we should work on that. We should start a petition.
Right.
Move.org.
Well, all those people who claimed they were going to leave last time did not leave somehow.
I don't know.
Or they visited their second European home a little bit more frequently, but they did not leave.
I have a friend that you also know that just came back from Canada 2 days ago. And he said he heard the same joke so much that it was ad nauseum. He was like, if I hear that joke one more, virtually every Canadian person, he went to a conference in Toronto and he was speaking. And he said virtually, it felt like everybody that came up to him and spoke to him and was making small talk said, are you ready to move out? You can stay in my basement. You can come stay in my basement here in Canada. You can come stay in my basement, as if to imply that everybody was wanting to move out of the States because Trump won.
Yeah.
A little bit, Trudeau is a conversation for another day.
Right.
A modern day socialist.
Some would say, a modern socialist, but he's maybe a modern tyrant in many ways.
Well,
but let's save that one for a different conversation. That's a good conversation.
Yeah. Anyway, I just thought it was ironic about people moving out.
So the one thing we haven't really talked about in our contrasting of the assassination attempts between Trump and Reagan is, the fact that we touched, I think, already a little bit on the differences in the responses by the Secret Service, and that they both had failings. With Reagan, it was breaching this outer perimeter that was not supposed to have anybody that close to him. Hinkley found himself that close. And in Trump, they did not set up surveillance properly. So he was assigned a sniper team without a surveillance team. Normally, a surveillance team and a sniper team come together as a package.
Do you think it's apples and oranges to ask this question? Do you think you could compare what is a more egregious deficit protection of a president, Reagan's situation with Hinkley and how close he got, or Crooks,
Thomas Crooks,
how close Crooks was able to get? He wasn't close, but how close he was to killing them.
Yeah.
In other words, it's really because of the difference in technology and time. Is it a fair comparison to try to suss out really who blew it more, the Trump's or Reagan's Secret Service detail?
Well, I'm not sure that they are directly comparable, other than the fact that the Secret Service may not have had all of their their regulations, their rules, their procedures abided by.
You talk about Trump
on both sides, right?
Both sides. Okay.
In both cases, there was some breach of protocol, and that breach of protocol probably led to the outcome that we saw. And is it directly comparable? I don't think so. The venues were totally different. Trump was giving a speech in an outdoor venue in the summer, and Reagan this was spring, and he was giving an indoor talk, and then he was.
I just meant the proximity to the shooters. The proximity of the shooters got to their targets.
Yeah.
If you think about Hinkley being 30 feet.
Yeah.
Right.
It's odd. It's odd he got so close.
Yeah, and you wonder, not to parse down too far into something that may not even be germane to the conversation, like the technology, for example, of the earpieces in '81.
Yeah.
Right. How good was the communication? Because
they're the flying pigeons back then, right? So they would send the pigeon out with the scroll.
Well, the Fred Flintstone and the scroll. The other question too, with how close Hinkley got, obviously. Was there metal detectors in '81? Were the people that?
Oh, sure, yeah, absolutely.
So there was metal, and because there was obviously metal detectors in the Trump situation.
Magnometers, yeah. I think that they requested 13. They only had 10 for Trump's venue, is what I'd read.
Oh wow,
yeah.
But he didn't get through a metal detector.
But the more important,
the shooter at Trump didn't get through a metal detector.
No,
so the fact that there wasn't enough metal detectors.
He was outside the perimeter.
Yeah, which is
so that's the point. That perimeter was maintained this time around. But what wasn't maintained is their surveillance. There was a water tower, this kind of tall water tower with the tank on top, just outside of the set of buildings that both the Secret Service sniper team and Thomas Crooks was using, right, separately. That one was unsecured, but it was the best vantage point. If they'd have had a surveillance team, that is the Secret Service had a surveillance team, they could have had a person up there with binoculars, two people up there with binoculars, and they did not. So
how do you explain that? How do they explain that?
Because Jill Biden was giving a speech. She had a 400-person venue that she was talking to, and they provided her both sniper team and the surveillance team. Trump had 15,000 outdoor venue, and they denied him the surveillance, but they gave him the sniper team. The point, though, here that I want to make quickly is that had that water tower had a Secret Service agent on it, they would have seen Crooks on top of that roof way before he ever pulled the trigger. Yeah. And the game over, right? But because of the shortages, they did not have a surveillance team. What they could have done, however, is they could have taken the sniper team, which were pairs. So a sniper team is in two. So they could have taken the 3 sniper teams they had and turn those into one-man sniper teams, 3 one-man sniper teams, and 3 surveillance guys, right? They would have been separated, but they could have been in communication with walkie-talkies.
Doubling your effective,
making a surveillance team when you didn't have one. That's just me. I am not an expert about these matters.
Let's take this to down one notch darker, and here it is. What are the chances that the Biden administration intentionally delineated the extra resources to Jill Biden to create a security deficit for Trump?
So,
I mean, with the hopes, because they were saying, some people said the quiet part out loud.
It's a plausible scenario, and partially the reason is that there was at that time, the Secret Service, the CIA, the FBI were all aware that Iran had agents considering assassinating Trump.
They discovered the assassination attempt in the works with the Iranian government.
Which is why they insisted on having the sniper team at Trump's rally. They knew that Iran was targeting Trump. And so with that knowledge in hand, that they didn't have their surveillance team.
More resources,
it makes you wonder, right?
Yeah, I mean, more than wonder.
Now, there's a corollary to this, potential intentional gaffe with Reagan as well. It turns out that the Hinkleys and the Bushes were very close families, close enough that Neil Bush and John Hinkley Jr., the assassin, his brother Scott, were scheduled to have dinner 2 days after the assassination. These were people who were communicating with one another. So one questions, we don't have any firsthand knowledge that this was an intentional thing, but some might argue, hey, if you set up the conditions to make somebody really mad at Reagan, might they go after Reagan, right? And so
fast forward to today to who?
To Trump. So if you vilify Trump, and then you call him a Nazi, you call him
a threat to democracy,
a racist,
misogynist,
right. So are you willing then to then put the enforcement shield around him? Well, no, not exactly. We're going to just have it a little bit less, a little bit more porous than that enforcement shield should be. With Reagan, there's no indication that anybody thought that the Secret Service was not doing its job properly.
Right.
But protocol was missed somehow.
Well, the Bush-Hinckley connection is certainly intriguing.
It's intriguing.
And just quickly as an addendum to that, speaking of the Bush family, there's the whole bin Laden connection and the oil deal and the oil. There is a lot of murmur, whispering about the Bush family and really what their motivations were. And they
were both oil families. The Hinkleys were tangentially involved in oil, and the Bushes were more directly involved with oil.
I think it's been at least proven or attempted to be proven, demonstrated that the Bushes' financial backing in their initial foray into the oil business came from the bin Laden family.
Is that right?
That is a more than once repeated theory about the very first oil deal that the Bush family did came from bin Laden family money borrowed, and that's how they launched Bush, like George Bush's grandfather, I think, Bush Senior's father.
Yeah.
It's a pretty interesting.
So that would be Walker. I think that's the Walker side of the Bushes.
Nicely done, Jeff. That's impressive.
I may be wrong.
We got more info than I do. Anyway, Walker Bush. So the point of it all is that it runs deep, and this sort of almost indirectly or unintentionally, I should say, ties back to Trump wanting to drain the swamp. The swamp is a real thing, right? Yeah. Think about the tentacles. Think about the people and the optics and the forward-facing politicians, even on the right, that may be undermining.
But the intrigue is even more, right? So we've got this weird, dinner date between the brothers of Hinckley and Bush, but George Bush. This is 41, President 41. When he was vice president, Reagan's first Secretary of State was Alexander Haig. And Alexander Haig was a very noted person in Washington D.C. Very much
polarizing
an insider.
figure.
In
Kind
insiders,
of a polarizing figure. The left, he was a bit of a target of the left. Sorry.
An insider's insider. And so when he began doing his policy work, he was rubbing George Bush the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
So Alexander Haig and Bush were kind of battling behind the scenes for Reagan's attention. Haig wanted to be the man who set foreign policy in the Reagan administration. Bush wanted to be the man who set foreign policy for the Reagan administration. So what's interesting is a vice president has always been sort of a sleepy position. You give speeches to grade schools, and you go on to do some things that are less desirable, but
break the
needed.
champagne bottle in the front of a yacht.
That's right. They're more ceremonial in nature. But Bush wanted to take charge of foreign policy. Could it be that he was not happy with where Alexander Haig was going to lead foreign policy? Was it not in his interests to go that way? I don't know. These are really interesting questions. So it came down to an ultimatum. Either Haig was going to have to leave or Bush was going to leave. And ultimately, Reagan decided to stick with Bush as his vice president.
I think there was a lot of murmuring at the time that Haig had presidential aspirations. He was always trying to get the limelight. He was always trying to take the lectern. And of course, we all know the most famous, what really put Alexander Haig on the map and also took him off the map, ironically, was the comment when Reagan was shot. And he said, the president's been shot. Everything's under control in the White House. I'm in charge. And he clearly wasn't in charge by the family tree, by the chart, the authority chart, whatever the term is.
Yeah, the vice president, that's his job.
Yeah, and everybody was just like, whoa, wait a minute. Yeah, it was obviously a heated moment and heated situation, but that's a gaffe you don't recover from.
No.
Proclaiming you're in charge when you're not.
Yeah.
I mean, in a public press conference. So you remember this, right?
No, I don't actually, but I've read about this. I don't know, from the time.
But you know what I'm talking about,
yes.
that situation. I think that was the undoing of Haig. Alexander Haig, I believe.
It was already set at that point.
That was the end of it.
That Bush was going to.
But the press absolutely was unrelenting, left and right, went after Haig for that misstep.
Well, Haig's a tyrant, right?
Yeah.
If Haig were president, he would be a tyrant. He wanted to run with authoritarian.
I think he did want to have a bigger role in government, and I think he saw himself more capable. I think he wanted to sort of clear the room and take over every chance he got.
Well, and we saw Trump do some really smart things in this regard, even in his first, revolving door cabinet in his first term in office. Trump put in relatively weak figures, right, in state.
But I don't think do you think he chose them because they were weak?
Yes.
I don't know if I agree with that.
Trump wanted to be the developer. Trump does believe that his instinct for foreign policy is superior to all those people who have lots of special interest motivations behind their advice giving. Trump believes in his intuition. He trusts his intuition.
I don't know if I disagree with him.
So Rex Tillerson was his first Secretary of State. Rex Tillerson was the CEO of Exxon.
Yep.
Rex Tillerson was not adequately informed to be the Secretary of State. But Trump was trying to, I think, intentionally diminish the status of the Department of State in the government, portfolio
by
of
selecting
departments.
Tillerson.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know if I fully agree with that. It's an interesting idea, and it may in fact be true and provably true. I do know one thing is that I think Trump, if you think about going from a private businessman, right, who's in essence obviously a real estate developer, successful, and a certain high profile, and certainly everything, he's at the top of the pyramid, and so then you're thrust into the White House, which is very much a cat and mouse game. It's whack-a-mole. It's all about cohesiveness and partnerships and
Game of Thrones. Some might say.
Yes, indeed. We should start a show called that. That's a good idea.
Yeah,
right there. Good thinking.
Kind of a medieval kind of vibe.
Right. But based on anyway. Point of it all is if you're Donald Trump and you get into that situation in his first presidency, even for somebody of Donald Trump's ilk, where you're trying to build a $2 billion building on a 100 square foot lot in downtown New York, like growing up like 1,000 feet in the air with all the logistics of that. Okay, even for Donald Trump, by his standards, taking over the presidency, I just read Trump right now has 1,200 people to appoint.
Yeah.
So think when you, at any job and any time you've had in your life and you're trying to hire somebody, the process of hiring a person, parsing through their experience and what are their motivations and, and how do they fit in and about 1,200 people. So what do you do?
Well, but part of the problem with that, I agree with the sentiment exactly. So don't get me wrong. Part of the problem with hiring somebody privately is the HR itself. The HR provides.
Now you're talking about another podcast.
That's two podcasts.
Yeah.
It's
one for H and one for R.
That's right. but the HR itself makes it difficult. In this case, he gets to choose pretty much whom he wants to.
But it's not a question whether he gets to choose him. It's a question whether or not he has the proper time
or
and
whether Congress or whether the Senate will provide its advice and consent.
I'll give you an example, though. I'll give you an example, and everybody knows this. But let's take Fauci for a second. Obviously, a very polarizing figure, and we, as time has not been well to Anthony Fauci, and those of us that recognize him as a rat at the beginning.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah,
it's not clear.
Anyway, but if somebody like Anthony Fauci, Trump would be in a meeting, and somebody would say, "Hey, look, we need somebody to head this situation," and somebody would recommend him. And then you would say, okay, well, I guess, and the person would lay it out for 5 minutes or 15 minutes, and Trump has to make a decision. There's 1,199 more people.
Yeah. No, that's right.
So all he could go by, and so he learned a terribly bitter lesson. I'm convinced they sat down Donald Trump for COVID and they said, Mr. President, if you don't do what I say right now, 2 million people are going to die, 5 million people, 20 million people. Now, how much gravity for the moment? So the first thing the president says is, okay, you've got my attention. What do you recommend I do?
Yeah.
Because the person that's bringing that tidbit of information also holds supposedly the solution to the situation. So the first thing you do is empower that person to then solve the problem that they have laid at your feet. That's what happened to Trump. He made a lot of poor decisions. I mean, Christopher Wray's a great example. Just, got away with it. Jerome Powell, what's her name? The little woman that was also in charge of the Fed.
Janet Yellen.
Thank you. Janet, both these people were chameleons. They got in the room with Donald Trump. They told him what they wanted to hear. He didn't have a lot of time to figure things out. He was completely new at the game.
Yeah.
He was dropped out of a spaceship into the White House as a private businessman, right? So he is putting a lot of stock. And by the way, Donald Trump is a person based on loyalty. And if you're loyal to Donald Trump, he's loyal to you. And it would never work in Donald Trump's world to go, you know what, let me recommend somebody to you. And he knows he's going to fail. People did that to him all day long. And he finally figured out these people don't have my best interest in mind. It sounds naive. It's not naive. It's based on moral character. It's based on experience. It's based on handshake deals in a New York alley saying, let's put up a $100 million building. Don't screw me. I won't screw you. And you shake hands.
So you think I'm getting the feeling that you're suggesting that much of the way he does business may also make him a target for people who really hate him.
Thank you, because I was. You're right. Thank you. That's exactly the point I'm making, and I don't necessarily fault him for that. He came in and he used his skill set, and as limited as his skill set was, look at the charm of Donald Trump is the weakness of Donald Trump. His everyman and his business sense and his I'm right, get the F out of my way is both a blessing and a curse.
So Reagan suffered from very similar problem, right? He came in and he was going to change the way government worked. He believed fundamentally.
I don't think Reagan garnered the same amount of respect though that Trump does with world leaders. Do you think so? I don't think Reagan
I think yes. I think Reagan was a very powerful. I don't know that in his first term necessarily, but by the time he was in his second term, he was revered.
I don't
Margaret Thatcher.
The second term,
Europe. No, he was very much revered.
I'm saying when Reagan first got in, he had an aw shucks quality to him.
My point, though, yes, it's true. He did, but he was governor. He had been a politician. See, he was governor of California for many years before getting to the White House, so he knew how to run a large government. But what he did was he brought with him very much a principled approach, a libertarian approach to government, a small, limited government, and a large sprawling government despised that. And could this have led to people being very dissatisfied with having such a person, such a visionary in office? Possibly. Maybe Trump the same. I mean, I'm concerned about what's going to happen in the future. Will Trump continue to be a target? I think he will. I think Reagan after that was always a target. And so we saw that different protocols, different precautions were taking place. Speaking of which, I really wanted to touch on one aspect of this conversation, and it is the bravery.
One quick point about the Secret Service, quickly. Let's talk about bravery because it's a great point. I've heard, and I'm interested in what this means, but I've heard that Trump, or it's not I've heard, apparently Trump has been given the highest level now from the Secret Service. Okay, so he went from whatever
He's
level.
He's the president-elect. I think they have to, yeah.
But I think it was after the assassination attempt, or maybe when he won, I don't know when, recently. My question and my point is you would think that alone would, look, behind the scenes, they're sitting in a room and they're going, that guy and that guy are rhinos, and that guy isn't. And I wouldn't put this guy in the front lines to protect you from a bullet, this Joe and Frank over here. I'd put Steve and Jim in front of you into bullets. And they're going to suss that out. They didn't do that before. Now that he's got, my point is, I don't think there's as much to worry about as we may think there is, because everybody's watching. Trump is watching, the public's watching, the Secret Service is under a microscope. It would be...
Well, at this point, if Iran killed Trump while he was either president-elect or president, got in, after the inauguration, then they'd have the United States, annihilating them. So that would not be smart. So I don't think you're going to see those. But as a private citizen, Trump, I think that they were willing to do that. But can I?
Okay, go to the bravery. And there's J.D. Vance in the wings, by the way. If something happens,
yeah, that's true.
Beautiful, which is a good thing.
So the amount of bravery that we saw with the Secret Service in both cases, it's really amazing. With Reagan, there's a classic black and white video of a Secret Service agent. Two agents are notably positioned in this video. We'll call this video up. Can we get that video included here? So the first is the first thing to observe in the slow motion on this is a man named Jerry Parr, who is the number 1 Secret Service agent, the lead detailed attached to Reagan. He's Reagan's first guy. After the first bullet is heard ringing out, Jerry Parr puts his hand on Reagan's back and is pushing him behind the door through the car. Now, Reagan ends up getting shot by the 6th bullet as it either glances the door or it gets right through directly, or it may not. There is a ricochet. There's a known ricochet, but we don't know if that was the bullet that actually slid through the opening where the door was, and then it hit Reagan below the armpit into his chest, or if it actually went directly through that very small gap. It's very possible that it was just straight through as well. But this was not one of the exploding rounds, mercifully. Otherwise,
weren't they all exploding, but it didn't explode?
That's correct. They were all exploding rounds, devastators, but only 2 of them actually detonated in the way that the ammo was supposed to detonate. So Jerry Parr pushes Reagan through the door. The next thing you see is a young Secret Service agent by the name of Tim McCarthy. And Tim McCarthy is just a few years older than Hinkley himself. And he hears the first round go off. He turns in the direction of the bullets. In the video. There it is.
And
he puts his arms out and makes himself as wide as possible. And he takes a shot to the chest and then falls and collapses. But here's a guy who actually went into bullet fire to protect the president.
You hear the expression, you're supposed to take a bullet and dive. This guy did it. He did the definition.
Now, there was there was a D.C. police officer, and his name, I think, was Thomas Delante, and he got shot in the back, survived. Everyone survived, even James Brady, the press secretary.
I think everybody was moving towards Reagan, right?
That's right. They were sort of moving around, but the bravery of Tim McCarthy is kind of amazing to see. So we also see some bravery with the Trump the response of Secret Service to Trump's assassination attempt. These guys were in a different situation. They were on the ground, at the ground level. Trump was up on the dais and speaking, and he kind kind of flinches and grabs his ear. But these guys then start running up on stage and they make a mound, a ball of human flesh around him. They did something very similar. So the bravery of somebody to run into bullet fire is kind of tremendous. It's something we should all recognize. That
there's an interesting thing, too, because obviously the sniper in the Trump assassination took out Crooks.
You mean the Secret Service sniper?
Yeah. So the Secret Service sniper took out the
some sniper. I'm not sure if it was the actual Secret Service sniper or if it was the SWAT people who were there. Somebody I'm not sure about which one.
But the point I'm making is, if you think about it, that the guy shooting at Trump has, for lack of a better term, free reign. So he's shooting. No one's grabbing.
No.
Hinkley starts to shoot and he's mobbed
immediately.
So the question really, if you think about the two time in real time, the time lapse, Hinkley gets off a few shots in less than 2 seconds.
Six.
Yeah, but he gets off a series
less than
of shots
2 seconds.
In less than 2 seconds. He's completely not just immobilized. He's completely, obviously overwhelmed physically. This guy on the roof, the sniper
Crooks.
at Crooks, is shooting at Trump. Has the time, he gets off, does he get off, does he get 6 shots?
I think it might be 5 or 6 shots, yeah.
Yeah, but now obviously he's nervous, but he does not have the same physical altercation immediately following the shooting. I don't know.
No, after that one, I think you can hear it, when you watch the slow-mo of the Trump assassination, you can hear the quick succession of the fire from his gun. And then, you see Trump grab his ear, people are down, the Secret Service mob him, but then you hear a last pow. And that last pow is the Secret Service or the SWAT sniper killing him. And they used a very large caliber round, and they just killed him straight up.
I just think it's interesting because Hinkley had, it's very interesting then that Hinkley had a better vantage point 30 feet away.
Yeah.
He's got a 22 and a very odd sort of selection. I mean, if he'd have had a 44 Magnum or something, it'd be over. I mean, anybody within, a basketball gone. And so, but Hinkley had a much enjoyed, sadly, morbidly, a much better perspective on Reagan, his target.
But the point of the Secret Service agents is they didn't know what rounds were coming at them. They didn't know if it was a 22. They didn't know if it was a rifle,
gunfire,
whatever. It's gunfire, and they had to do their job. The one thing I have to say I was surprised by in reviewing the video of the Trump assassination is they had an armored SUV. And they
now you're getting into the crazy Keystone Cops afterwards.
It is kind of crazy. The one there were a couple of female, and I'm not saying that females are incapable of doing this job. Please don't take it that way. I'm not.
Females are incapable.
They're capable of doing this job. Okay. These particular females, however, seem to not be with the program very much. They were bumbling around trying to holster a weapon. They
what
were
that is,
moving in a funny way.
Is? That's a lack of training because your training has to be instinctual.
Yeah.
You have to do something so many times. Tiger Woods at the golf range, he goes and does 10,000 drives. It's just instinctual. You have to have that instinct. And they were trying to think. They were trying to process information.
Here's the other problem is, they were, Trump's 6'2", these people were maybe 5'5". Yeah. So there was a clear gap above their heads that could have, exposed Trump. But at any rate, they chose to move him in this mound of human flesh, of Secret Service flesh, to the SUV, rather than backing that SUV up very quickly, providing kind of a barrier against additional gunfire. They didn't know if it was one
could have been a second
sniper,
shooter,
second sniper.
Yeah.
We had no idea. They backed that car up, they could have had better protection and shorter distance to span between getting him into something that's armored.
It's a fundamental, it's a basic flaw in their response. I mean, it's indefensible.
Yeah.
It's not as if they said, why didn't they have a SWAT thing? They had it there.
They had it
there for just such an occasion and then didn't initiate its use.
Yeah.
Crazy to think that somebody, and then like you said, the agents are fumbling, trying to get their gun in.
But just not knowing what to do. If you look at them, they're looking around like they don't quite know what to do. And to juxtapose that with the scenario with Reagan, these people had laser precision. They knew what they were doing. Timothy McCarthy was a young man. I mean, it wasn't like he was a 58-year-old Secret Service agent who'd done that for 25 years.
Yeah, we're getting the wrap thing. I think the one thing to say to remind people is, first and foremost, what would have happened to the Trump family, his siblings, his children, his grandchildren, his friends. What would the devastation if he would have succeeded, and then what would happen to the country? If you think of the divisiveness, if you think of,
we would have been denied an election. We would have been denied
not
a
only
voice.
that, but not only that, of course, I'm sorry, that's a huge point. I didn't mean to talk over you, Jeff. But what I was going to say was, think too about the level of divisiveness, because the people there could have been rioting in the streets. There would have been no shortage of conspiracies that the government was behind it. It's unfathomable. You cannot really think where the country would be. Not to mention that we would not have the supposed hopeful semblance of order that's now in store, coming soon. So the idea that how close they came, that they nicked his ear, is of, it's too much to get your head around. It's still mind-boggling to think how close that guy came, how the basic fundamental breakdowns in the Secret Service's surveillance and handling of the situation. It seems that if you or I were hired that day, first day on the job, no Secret Service training, we'd be like, well, that building looks like a guy could shoot from that. Like, we should put a guy in that building. Hey, Bill, go get on the building.
Honestly,
with a radio.
Again, I am not in the clandestine. So I'm not knowledgeable about these things.
Do you see my point?
But I would have seen that water tower and said, if I was going to try to hurt somebody, I'd want to be up in that building. That
so
spot.
obvious.
I mean, it's just, you have the high ground, right?
Listen, it's obvious why. Go to a prison. What do they have the prison guards in?
And a tower.
A tower. Why? Because they. So it's really stunning.
Now, you spent some time there, right?
Prison, so Well, some of the towers are taller than others, and some of the guards are nicer than the others. But that's a podcast for another day. I have a tattoo to show. Anyway, it's kind of crude because I got it in the joint. Anyway. Thanks. This has been great.
Hey, it's been great.
And if you guys like this, let us know. Interested to hear from you if you have different perspective.
We love comments.
Yeah.
Keep them civil, because this is all about civil dialogue, civil conversation, the sharing of ideas.
Jeff will be civil. I won't be. No, I'm just kidding. We'll both be civil in our responses. Anyway, this has been great. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.